Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. And it is an absolute honor to rise in the House today, and somewhat intimidating to follow the honourable member for Carleton, the Leader of His Majesty's Loyal Opposition. Obviously, we heard a very compelling case for supporting this motion. The fact is that Canadians are hurting from coast to coast to coast. They're feeling the effects of soaring cost of living, ever-increasing cost at their fuel pumps, ever-increasing heating cost, and obviously ever-soaring cost to actually have a place to live in, whether that be the mortgage rates that have doubled over the last 8 years, the rents doubling, seeing interest rates going up, and seeing the dream of home ownership fastly falling away from so many of our young people. Mr. Speaker, it's something that all of us in this House, if we did take the time to visit in the communities that we represent, which I'm sure many do. I know in the travels that I've had, the conversations that I've experienced recently, hearing from Canadians back home in Western New Brunswick, and yes, in recent visits that I made, engaging with people on the beautiful island of Prince Edward. When it comes to Prince Edward Island, I'm hearing it there as well. Throughout Atlantic Canada, Canadians are hurting. And they're experiencing the pain of this ever-expansive cost of living that challenges them even when they go to get necessary supplies at the grocery stores. Perhaps some of the most heartbreaking stories I've heard have come from seniors who've worked hard all their lives, counting on the ability for what pensions they do have and what they paid into to be able to carry them through. But they're honestly and sincerely worried, Mr. Speaker, that what they've set aside and what they worked hard to save up, will it be enough to sustain them as things continue to rise in cost? Some, and especially Atlantic Canada, have had to make the tough decisions and are facing another long winter, wondering, do they have enough left over to pay their heat bill and also make sure there's adequate groceries, let alone put a little bit of fuel in their gas tank? These challenges are very real. And when you take the time to hear their stories, you cannot help but be affected by it. It's our job as their representatives in their house, this House, which is their House, the people's House, to bring those concerns to bear right here. Our job as His Majesty's Loyal Opposition is to make sure that the government is held to account, that they're responsible in the legislation that they bring forward, and that the legislation they bring forward has positive impact on the lives of the people that we all represent. So I believe it would behoove this House, and it would be a responsible thing for this government and this entire House to move and bring forth motions and legislation that represent the concerns that we're hearing right now. And the top of mind concern for Canadians from across this country, bar none, is the soaring cost of living and inflationary concerns. You're hearing it everywhere you go. I'm hearing it. And so I believe it would do well for all of us to consider what is happening right now that's causing Canadians this kind of angst and this kind of concern. What is leading to the increased levels of anxiety and despair that we're seeing, and desperate situations happening not only in our inner cities, but also in our rural communities? What is causing this? Well, after 8 years, we have seen some things that have led to the current circumstance that we're in. There's been a multiplicity of factors, but one of them that cannot be discounted is the fact that this Prime Minister has added more national debt than all other previous Prime Ministers combined. That is a fact, and it's a staggering fact. When you over double the debt, not talking about deficit, talking about the debt of this country in less than 8 years, you are doing something that is going to have devastating consequence over the long term. When you have $500 billion of inflationary deficits has directly led to 40-year high inflation rates. We are seeing that prior to the budget in 2023, even our own Minister of Finance said what Canadians want right now is for inflation to come down and for interest rates to fall. That is one of our primary goals of this year's budget. It wasn't to pour more fuel on the fire and then proceed to usher in $60 billion in new spending. So someone's not hearing what's being said. And if they are hearing what's being said, they are certainly applying the wrong fix to the problem. You cannot stop inflation and soaring interest rates by spending increasing amounts of money. That's adding fuel to the fire, as has been previously stated, that the former Liberal finance minister, John Manley, said you cannot keep doing this and expect to be successful. We're seeing this all throughout history. Anytime governments have gone down this road, that in order to increase the revenues to pay for ever-expanding debt and deficits, they what? Inevitably increase taxes. Well, ask the citizens of this country, can they afford more tax? I think the answer would be a resounding no. They have more bills than they have paychecks. And when you get to the end of your paycheck and all you've got is another bill waiting, then a government suggests, well, we're going to quadruple your carbon tax because you'll feel better when you do it. And if you do it, somehow it's going to cause the weather to change and the climate to improve. When we asked the Environment Commissioner at the Natural Resources Committee just a short time ago, is there yet in place in Canada a metric that can tell us how much the carbon tax, which is one of the major factors of inflation in this country, how much the carbon tax has reduced the amount of carbon in Canada's atmosphere? The Environmental Commissioner of Canada responded by saying, we have no such metric in place as of yet. So the landmark signature piece of environmental legislation that has led to huge inflation in this country doesn't even have a metric by which we can tell Canadians its impact on the overall environment of Canada. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a disgrace, and it's impossible to justify to the Canadian population while at a time of economic duress and when they're feeling the heat economically and their finances are depleting, we're going to go back as a government and tell them yet again, oh yes, we're going to keep augmenting your carbon tax because, well, we really can't tell you why, because we can't demonstrate its effect on the environment. That is unjustifiable. I think it's time for a course correction, and I think it's time that the government rearranges priorities and get back to what it needs to be doing, which is developing the potential that Canada has, which is incredible. And if you want to tackle the inflationary problem that we have in this country, let's get our economy growing, let's get our people working, and let's get off their backs and start removing the hindrances to their prosperity and growth. And you know what the definition of frustration is? It's impeding progress and feeling like you have all this potential that you can't touch, and never being able to attain where you want to be because of the weight that's on your back currently. That's why there's an increasing sense of frustration amongst Canadians, and they're crying out for change. They're wanting a government to get out of the way, stand on their side and say, unleash our potential, let us do what we do best, let us grow, develop, work, make money, and yes, make a profit so that we can better the lives of our children, our families, and our future. Mr. Speaker, I hope the government will do the right thing and support our motion today. Thank you very much.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliament.